So the UK funding model. So under the UK government policy, the amount of funding a project can receive is related directly to the damages it will prevent, plus any other benefits delivered. So the amount of government money we can allocate to a project, which is known as grant and aid, depends on the benefits and the outcomes of the project. If the eligible grant and aid funding does not cover all of the costs of the project, you may need to raise extra money from partners through contributions. So this is what we call partnership funding. Anyone who benefits from a FCRM project, so that's a flood, coast, erosion risk management project, can be a partner, including people like local communities, businesses, developers, or local councils. Some projects will be eligible for 100% funding, but most, 40 to 60% of our projects, require this extra partnership funding. So in Devon and Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, the grant and aid investment equates to £40 million, but the majority of our projects require some of that top-up funding. So these funding rules mean that sometimes projects don't go ahead or a smaller scale project is delivered. We also have other things to consider, such as carbon reduction targets, which is making us work differently. We're moving away from the hard engineering and/or combining it with approaches such as natural flood management. So the figures in this diagram here are from the last 6-year programme for the whole of the Environment Agency, just to give an indication of scale that we're working at. Okay, so the UK funding model. So where we were. So I just talked you through how our funding our projects works and how does this relate to nature-based solutions specifically? At the moment, farmers get paid for land productivity, and that is what we are competing with for nature-based solutions. For example, why would the farm take productive land that they can get paid to keep productive and plant trees for nature-based solution? Trees would take up the footprint of that productive land. So farm payments need to change, and/or we need to prove a piece of land with nature-based solutions can be productive. Historically, hard defences have been easier to fund. We can quantify the benefits of these approaches and people can see them, and therefore they are easier to attract funding to. Our calculations for the amount of government money we can allocate to a project, known as grant and aid, favours the protection of houses with a lower payment for the environment. So that's where we were. Where we are currently, we're currently in a period of transition. Our previous rules have been making nature-based solutions difficult to fund. But for the Environment Agency, the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy will change the approach from one that has prioritised new flood defences and reactive incident management activities to a more rounded approach, which will aim to enhance resilience to flooding and adaptation away from those locations where the risks are too high or unresolvable. So we're in a period of learning. We are understanding the science and how it fits in our current work. We have lots of ideas at the moment with some knowledge gaps and some policy problems. So to do this, to continue our learning, DEFRA, through the Environment Agency, has set up a number of pilot funds to help develop our knowledge. So these are funds such as the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, which is about projects getting ready for investments, so altering the funding mechanism so farmers would get paid for public goods. The Innovative Resilience Fund, and the aim of this is to encourage local authorities, businesses and communities to test and demonstrate innovative practice resilience actions in their areas. And another is the 3 Cs, which is championing for coastal coordination. Now, this is an EA initiative with the support from DEFRA, from Natural England, the Marine Management Organisation, and the Association of Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authorities. This is a collaboration seeking to explore how to enhance and progress coordination for coastal sustainability and resilience in England. So this is a real recognition of the major challenges that we face in our coastal and estuarine environments. We're currently trying to increase our knowledge with such funds. And where do we want to be? So where are we aiming for? We're aiming for farm payments for public goods. If we can prove a piece of land is productive with nature-based solutions, that could work. For example, salt marshes acting as a buffer to coastal defences. We want nature-based solutions to be the go-to approach to be added to all projects. And part of this will require funding to be generated from the approaches, which is why the investment readiness project and natural capital approach is so important. We need to encourage businesses to fund these approaches. Okay, so let's look at a case study. So one of the funds I just discussed was the Innovative Resilience Fund, and we have two of these projects in our area in Devon and Cornwall, and the one that I'm going to look at is the Cornwall Council bid. So Cornwall Council secured this funding to protect sand dunes, which act as vital sea defences for coastal communities. Cornwall was one of 25 areas in England in line to benefit from a share of the £150 million fund. The bid is called the Building Community Resilience on a Dynamic Coast by Making Space for Sand, and the project, which is hosted by Cornwall Council, could attract as much as £1 million per year of funding from DEFRA over the next 6 years. So this project recognises that coastal sand dunes are important natural sea defences, and the sustainability of many of our beaches is dependent upon the health of the sand dunes that lie behind them. This project will provide state-of-the-art assessments of Cornwall's past, present and future sandy beach dune systems, and it will use cutting-edge coastal modelling tools to stimulate and visualise future and coastal change and work with communities to help sustain coastal sand dune environments. So this will look at a total of 40 sandy beaches around the Cornish coast, and you can see a map here of all those locations. So this case study is an example of how we are learning for the future, and specifically how we're trying to fund nature-based solutions. So let's just have a little look at some of the issues we face with this. So some of the issues are related to the coast generally. So the coast, particularly in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same in other locations, consists of many highly interconnected landscapes and seascapes and has a diverse mix of ownership and government's arrangements, which makes funding solutions difficult. There's high economic competitions for space, which places multiple stresses on the environment and can result in coastal squeeze and habitat loss. The small communities mean that our ability to fund these locations is lower. Lots of our funding relies on high house numbers to get money in. The size of the community also means we're limited with other funding options. For example, in more urban areas, we would approach places like large businesses, look at supply chains and utility providers, but this becomes more difficult in smaller locations. Lots of our coastal locations are also deprived. There is little money and appetite for this kind of work. We have a transient population in our coastal locations. Lots of people come from their holidays, but they don't stay, and this can make funding it even more difficult. It's also difficult sometimes to show the immediate link or impact between the location and nature-based solutions. And this can be important for funding, as lots of private businesses would want to fly a flag from the wall or whatever they have contributed for, and losing this link can make funding less attractive. As we move from a very visual representation of flood protection, it's not as easy to pinpoint or to quantify the benefits. We also have an issue of urgency. So the timing of the interventions on the coast is hard to specify. We're moving from epochs in our shoreline management plan to tipping points. So event-driven changes, which can be hard to fund as you can't plan for some of those. The scale of impact is important. So if there is a big coastal event, it's likely to impact lots of our coastal locations. So then we have to start picking where we're going to fund. And adaptation. So most services in these communities are in the vulnerable zone. We need to start thinking about moving communities, but this has very hard funding implications. Who pays? And just to conclude, so at the moment, I feel that we have the aspirations to fund nature-based solutions, but it's really difficult within our policy and funding rules. We're moving to this through knowledge and new funds paving the way. With areas of growth and regeneration proposed in many of our coastal communities, sustainability to flood and coastal issues should be inherently built into the thinking of these locations to enable a greener and more sustainable economy to be built and to reduce overall community and to increase overall community resilience over time. Thank you. hopefully that was a useful run through of where we are in the UK. I'm going to end this slideshow now so I can start seeing you all, and we can start having a discussion. Am I still sharing my screen? Stop
Yeah,
sharing.
oh yeah, it's just stopped. Thanks, Chloe, and well done for doing that with such a sore throat.
Yeah, I'm just gonna.
So it looks like we've got a good mixture of people in the room. We've got Andrew Brett, who works for Staffordshire County Council, and he is interested to learn on how coastal works could potentially, he could apply those techniques to inland defences, as there's no coasts around there. We've also got Stuart Hunter, who works at the Environment Agency in the National Agriculture Team down in he lives in South Devon area. We've got Richard Hartley. This is quite an interesting one. He's just been working on the Humber flood risk management strategy and is now working on an NFM project in Leeds. We've got Alex Nicholson from Arup. I don't know if I've pronounced that right. Consultancy in London, specialising in
Arup, I think.
Arup.
You were almost there.
And we've got Richard Hartley, who has already put a question to the discussion, which we could start off with. Richard, would you like to join the discussion and put your question to the group?
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, I'll just, like Chloe, I'm suffering from a little bit of a cold as well, so I'm sort of I'm losing my voice a little bit, but I'll do my best. But yeah, I guess my question was just around how ELMS fits in with payments to landowners, really, and how it's kind of shaping up, because I know obviously the principle of ELMS is payments to landowners for the providing things that can be classified as being for the public good. So one of the big problems we're facing on the Leeds nature-based solutions project is trying to encourage landowners to take land out of production for things like tree planting and other sort of flood risk measures. And the question they always come back is well, what's in it for me? They get paid for the productive land. If they take it out of production, particularly if they plant trees, in effect that land is sterilised and represents loss of income. So I just wondered, do we have a feel for how ELMS is potentially able to replace some of that money that farmers would receive?
Brett's just raised his hand. Did you want to answer that question, Brett?
Thank you. I'll try my best.
Thank you.
For our international colleagues, ELMS is the Environmental Land Management Scheme, part of the UK or England's approach to the replacement for CAP subsidies and incentives for farmers. Subsidy mostly around production, has been explained earlier on. So I think the key to moving this forward is understanding the business model of the partners, the farmers that we work with, and understanding from that point what a diversification or another approach to a business model in terms of business planning they could benefit from. So, for example, if we took woodland, you don't have to take woodland out of production in terms of pasture. So you are still able to get 100% grant for planting trees, the capital, at 60% coverage, and still graze that land, which also helps with maintenance responsibilities. And you could have an income stream from elements like carbon credits. You could balance that offer and biodiversity net gain, although perhaps not so much with woodland, but balance that offer against the potential for impact on their business from the removal of basic payments, those incentives, that subsidy I was describing, which will be removed. So I think it's a conversation around stacking economic benefits from ecosystem services that can be provided by those new assets. So I think it's basing it around finance and understanding the economics of what are still quite new principles in terms of natural capital benefits. Another aspect would be flood risk. Of course, we're interested in that. And nutrients, again, nutrient credit trading is something that's developing fast. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting. That is, yeah, thanks for that, Brett.
Thanks, Brett. You explained that really well, probably better than I could have done, so I appreciate that. I'm just having a look through the chat. Unless anyone else wants to raise a question outside the chat.
We've got Kevin's hand is raised.
Sorry. Yeah, Kevin.
Morning, everyone. Interested to hear what Brett was just talking about. I mean, we're looking at trying to implement natural-based solutions across the River Severn catchment, and the subject about farmer compensation for setting productive land aside for whatever measure it is, either carbon capture or flood risk, is really pertinent. The question for Brett, and I think what you were saying is fantastic, but has that been communicated to anybody? Because there is a lack of knowledge about what the opportunities that Elms may provide in the future. And I think the one of the phrases that's been used when we've mentioned it before is don't hold your breath for anything that's going to be staggering. So has that been communicated anywhere, Brett? Because I'm not sure that there's that knowledge about it out there.
Yes, our DEFRA colleagues with ministerial changes, we just had a reshuffle and looking to again negotiations with the EU. We haven't. We've been drip fed really. What we do know of is the Woodland Creation Grant changes. So that's very helpful. At least we know that it's 100% capital grant there. In terms of basic payment, we know that's going over 7 years, well, less than that now, beginning 2024. So this is the point where those businesses will see a change and will need to adapt. So that knowledge is out there, and the Farmers Union, for example, very much vocal around this. Around carbon and soils, as the soil carbon code evolves, there will be a benefit there, as well as blue carbon and nutrient credits, again, developing. So there are signals, and we have to help, I think, the community move through this period of change. So for example, 80% of farms in Devon and Cornwall don't have a 5-year plan, and those 20% that do only have, I think it's 8% have that written down. They are mostly SMEs and family farms, and the profit that they make from farming, not diversification and any other element of their business, from farming is within 20% of the outturn of their agricultural business. So i.e. their basic payment is their profit. So that has an obvious impact on their business, and something that we can offer in terms of public goods an alternative for. Now that market is developing, and offline I can tell you how those markets are being assisted by government agencies, including the Environment Agency. But I'm aware of time and perhaps the need to talk about the coast as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brett. That's really useful.
Thanks, Brett. Millie, are we due back in the room in 2 minutes?
No, we are due back at 10:10.
Okay, cool.
So sorry, so I've actually got a question that I want to put to everyone. So I've been working on the Newlyn pilot project, which is part of this Interreg funded project that we're doing, which John introduced everyone to at the start. We're finding that there are a lot of nature-based solution projects which are successful, but they tend to be pilot projects, such as this Interreg funded project. I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts on how we can move successful nature-based solution projects from being pilot funded, which tend to be they're quite rapid sort of bids that get put out by the government, which we then quickly have to write a bid for, and how that can be moved further into mainline funding. I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that. I've got a hand up. Who's that? Mohammed?
Sorry, just realized I was on mute.
Hi there.
Hi, Camilla. Hi, Chloe. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, you've actually sort of hit a nail on the head there, really, and it's a bit of a question in another question sort of thing. Is that EA do DEFRA EA do a lot of pilots, but the problem is moving forward is a big problem, because you can't move forward because no feedback is ever seen from these pilot projects. So how, and then again, it just sort of disappears into the ether. I mean, there's been so many, like in my time in flood risk in 5 years, I've seen numerous pilot projects, but I've never heard anything back from local EA offices or even DEFRA or anything, as to what happened, lessons learned, or how DEFRA in itself is going to move forward with it. I mean, it remains to be seen, I think, really, but it's a question, and it's a question in itself, to be honest. So, and I don't think the answer necessarily sits. So I'm from Nottingham City Council, but I don't necessarily think the answer sits with LLFAs, to be honest, on that one.
Thanks, Mohammed. Sorry, where did you say you work? Are you Nottingham City Council?
Nottingham City Council, yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point, Mohammed, and I'm going to take that to our national team that runs some of these pilots to feed that back, because I think you're right. I think we're not particularly good at presenting some of those results, and it's definitely something we can improve on. So I'm sorry that that's your experience, but I will definitely be taking that back to national colleagues who run some of these pilots. Andrew, did you have something to say?
Yeah, just on the question that Mohammed asked, actually, part of the innovation grant, because we're actually one of the successful as well as like what Cornwall doing with the sand, it is actually expected within this innovation grant that we do a full presentation and demonstration for all other local authorities and other EA branches to actually see what was done and achieved, but also not just what was actually successful, but what actually wasn't, what didn't work. Because we're doing not obviously sand innovation work, but we're doing obviously a community-led innovation project, and as I say, we are expected to actually do a presentation after the 6 years.
That's great, thanks, Andrew. It's like I placed you there.
Is it fair, Andrew, to say that it's 6 months is the length of any IRF, and there'll be some reporting after that initially?
Yeah, there's actually a project on the way now to sort of demonstrate what we expect coming out of these innovation grants. We've just had ours this week, sort of quite a bit of a scattergun spider diagram, as it were, to say what we try and achieve. Everyone's doing the same. And then that would be sort of pushed forward. And if you go into the EA's Innovation Grant website, there's quite a lot of information there already, what each of us have done and hope to achieve. So there's going to be quite a good storyboard going through for the next 6 years on our projects and everything. And, I mean, we're certainly going to be going to the press about ours, going to newspapers and things. So the idea is to really push out there what we're doing.
Andrew, is yours a financial mechanism that you're testing, like an impact bond, etc., a fund of some sort?
We are going to be doing external searching for funding with this. The actual name of this is the FAIR project. So it's the Flood Aware, Informed and Be Resilient. So we've learned, certainly in the inland, that a lot of communities do not understand they're actually at risk. So that's where the aware comes in. So hence the name FAIR. So make people aware, then inform them of what their risk is, and then actually assist them and take ownership of their own resilience. So that could be a flood granting aid scheme, so that's via the other funding, or internally it'd be community funded projects such as just simply putting in new green bins, which might have some socks in, or other simple solutions to assist with flooding. So we're not actually just looking at a single thing, we're going to be looking at quite a broad brush of elements here within the whole community, and not looking at rich communities. We're going to be looking at very diverse communities. Is it language barriers that is causing issues? Is it education? So yeah, we're very excited about it, but I'm sure obviously a lot of the other LFAs that have got the innovation grant are as well.